Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank BIC for hosting us. I've been harassing Ravi to do an event with the Ravi Shankar Institute for Music and Performing Arts, so thank you so much, Ravi. I'm Simran Mangharam. I'm one of the trustees of the Ravi Shankar Institute of Music and Performing Arts. And I actually, before we start, I wanted to share the story of the day I actually met Pandit Ravi Shankar. I was a 22-year-old media professional. I was very excited to meet him, but I did not own a sari. And I rummaged through my mother's cupboard and I found a sari, and I thought that was the most appropriate attire to wear to meet this son of India, you know. So that's the aura that Ravi Shankar radiated. And as I was preparing this introduction, you know, a Times of India article quoting Pandit Shiv Kumar Sharma's association with Pandit Ravi Shankar kept coming to me. In Pandit Shiv Kumar Sharma's own words, quote, "No musician before Ravi Shankar had the kind of global appeal he had, and he was the true global ambassador of India much before our economic globalization. India was at that time only known as the country with snake charmers. He brought respect to Indian tradition and made the world understand what it stood for. He knew how to reach out to the uninitiated audience. He taught the world to respect Indian discipline and spirituality. Once I was traveling to New York for a concert with Ravi, a concert where Ravi was also performing. While clearing immigration, I told the officer that I was performing with him. He immediately had joy on his face and asked me to give Ravi ji his regards. I went out and the porter said the same. This is not a mean achievement. Indian music is Ravi Shankar. Today, we're here to talk about how Pandit Ravi Shankar put India on the world map. Joining me today are Mrs. Sukanya Shankar, founder trustee of RIMPA and his wife, and Guillermo Rodriguez Martin, founding director of the Casa de la India and Valladolid, the Indian Cultural Center in Spain, which was created in 2003. Guillermo is a multidisciplinary cultural manager, author and producer, specializing in contemporary Indian culture and intercultural dialogue. Please join me, Mrs. Sukanya Shankar and Guillermo. Sukanya ji, thank you so much for joining us. Who better than you to tell us how Guruji relentlessly kept his Indianness and really made the world understand who we are?
I'll address him as Guruji, like we all did. Yeah. I knew him for 40 years, exactly, out of which I lived with him for 25 years. I'm from south of India, trained in Carnatic music and dance, and I had my own vision of what music and art was until I met this giant. 1972, I was asked to play Tanpura for him by his niece, Viji, who was a very good friend of mine. She asked me, would I play Tanpura for him? I said, my God, of course I will, you know. So then she said, we are having a rehearsal. I had never heard of that. You know, playing Tanpura rehearsal, I've never heard of that. So I go there, Charles Street, London. I was a mere 17-year-old. And then I see him coming down the staircase. I'm just awestruck by his aura. He comes down, I even forget to greet him. I'm like standing there until I hear Lakshmi auntie, Viji's mom, telling me, Sukanya, namaskaram pannu, do pranam to him, you know, from the back. Then I touch his feet. Then He's very nice, very warm. We go up to for the rehearsal, yes. Then I take the tanpura and I'm doing this. And he says, you have nails, you know. Then I said, I play it like that, you know. It's not. He said, no. By chance, if your nail hits my string, it's going to jar the concert, you know. So he gets up, brings his nail cutter, and cuts my nail for me. That's my first experience with him. And I saw the significance of his taking every detail into consideration to bring his music to the front in the stage. The point of presentation was the ultimate for him. What went through in the back, nobody knew. His dedication, he practiced, went 3 hours before every concert for the rehearsal. It was like it was performing for the first time. Every single time. You know. He says, was I okay? Did I do okay? Please pray for me that I give my best. That was his, always, every concert. And how particular he was that what was worn, you know, like we go to the stage, what color of the sari was, he was particular, what would match with the sitar. He was very particular about that. The agarbatti had to be lit. He had the Om sign afterwards, later on, always, yeah. He was so Indian at heart, you know. He was a voracious reader. He knew everything. You could talk to him on any subject. And yet, the core of him was so Indian, you know, so Indian. We had people at our home, and you know it, Simran, always Indian food served. And his dedication of practice, discipline, till the end, till 92. You know, with oxygen, he would walk around the pool, you know, and practice till the end. That was him.
True. And I also remember, interestingly, I did a tour with them in 1998, and we were traveling to different parts of the world, and I'd never traveled abroad. And I remember his instruction to me that I will have to eat whatever was served in that country so that we really embrace their culture as well. But when people came to our home, we always served Indian food. So I think one of his biggest qualities was that as much as he embraced the world embraced him too. And I think there's a lot of power in that.
You want me to comment on that?
Yes. Because he also spoke so many languages.
He spoke several languages. He had such a musical ear. He made everyone feel at home. Guillermo will tell you whether he went to Spain or France. He spoke fluent French, of course. But wherever he went, Russian, Yugoslavia, you know, you would just talk to the housekeeper, made everybody feel at home. And the way he treated people. His humility, you know, I have yet to come across anyone like him. You know, whether it was a queen or the sweeper lady, it was the same. He would open the door for them, let them pass by, you know. And it's amazing.
It is indeed. Guillermo, when did your journey with Pandit Ravi Shankar start? And of course, tell us a little bit about Kasadala India as well.
Thank you. First of all, I want to, you know, of course, say big thanks to Sukanya for having thought of me, and Simran, of course, for putting it together, and the Bangalore International Center. The last time I was here, I was speaking on another important figure, A.K. Ramanujan, on whom I've done a lot of work, because he was also crossing cultures and translating, in this case, literature. Let me begin by saying that I think the beauty of such conversation is always there's the insider and then the outsider. And the last time I was here, I was speaking with Krishna Ramanujan, who's A.K. Ramanujan's son. So there was a similar situation where I had a person who was his son, in this case his spouse, and then the scholar or cultural anthropologist or the outsider, if you want. And I think that's interesting, because the topic, I believe, of the talk is also how Ravi Shankar's world and his music is universal, or how he put India on the map.
Yeah.
India as such, not just Indian music, if I understood that this is the focus. So, well, I can consider myself, I grew up in Germany, I'm Spanish, grew up in Germany, went to high school in the US, went to university at Edinburgh and in Chennai, Loyola College, and did my PhD in Kerala, and I'm back in Spain now. So I can say I've gone full circle. I can, to some extent, say I'm Western, I'm European. I feel that I'm European more than, I don't understand I don't believe in concepts such as West and Asia, or just constructs. But one thing I can say, my first contact with Ravi Shankar was through the film Gandhi. I was 12 years old, and in Germany they were quite advanced in those days. They made you go to see films in movies, very progressive. So once a week we should go to see a film. Now this film, I don't know how long, the first cut was like 3.5 hours, and we were 12 years old. And the only reason why we didn't fall asleep, because this music just hypnotized. It was hypnotized. Yeah. So more than the film, of course, this thin, frail personality in my head, it was the music. Yeah. And then I kept hearing in the radio, because Germany was a place in the early 80s, and I think this is also setting, early 80s, of course, in the 70s, I was much younger. Indian music, flamenco was still very much around. I mean, I don't have to explain, because you all know how, Indian music became very big towards the end of the 60s, when the Beatles, the Birds, the Animals, and others picked up. That was probably the peak, just around 1967, 1968, 69. I mean, just imagine an album becoming number 47 in the Billboard, a classical Indian music album in the pop chart. Yeah. 47 in end of the 60s. Then it kind of declined after, to some extent, in the 70s. I mean, from a cultural anthropological point of view, Indian music, and then it was there somewhere, and then all other genres came in, like flamenco became big. Of course, jazz fusion, even jazz with flamenco was invented. So in the early 80s, people were still listening to it, because the question is, how do you sustain? How the incredible contribution of Ravi Shankar is, and we don't have to explain his life. Yeah, it's too long. I mean, the pre-colonial and the post-colonial period, and of course you can't also understand Ravi Shankar's understanding of the world without understanding how he started as a dancer with Uday Shankar, and how Uday Shankar, his brother, learned quickly how he had to be, how he caught the Western audience's attention. With short pieces, how he structured a performance and so on. All these things that Ravi Shankar learned because he was a translator. Yeah. These great figures, even, a la par with Tagore had done it earlier. So when I was at high school, if somebody had to ask any high school classroom, okay, raise your hand, what do you know of India? Say early 80s. They would say Tagore and Ravi Shankar. Yeah. And I mean, I can vouch for it. I lived there. I was there. I wouldn't necessarily say Spain. Spain is a different case. We had a dictatorship. I don't think too many people... Yeah, of course, Beatles was big everywhere. But Spain is a special case. We woke up in the late 70s, so we don't really belong to the pop scene of what happened. And I'm deliberately not saying UK. I've chosen Germany. Yeah. I've chosen, of course, France. Yeah. You could say the same thing. So I've taken a typical educated, Germany is a good model, perhaps, because what it went through. Yeah. So these were the figures. So how do you sustain, throughout the decades, such interest in an artist? Because he was a workaholic. He kept it, and because he worked in so many different disciplines.
True.
And Martin Scorsese saying that because of the music that he heard in Apu trilogy in the 50s.
Yeah.
In my case, it was Gandhi through a film. So of course he's Indian, but to me his music is universal. So when you say his Indianness, we don't have to prove that he was Indian. Indianness is another such abstraction, of course. And to the very end, the way he lived, the way he, what he ate and so on. But it's the music that made it.
True.
And through the music came everything else.
True, and say, even when he collaborated, and here I would request you to throw some light, even when he collaborated with different artists from different genres of music, he was very pure in his music, as in his classical purity was retained. So tell us a little about that.
He had two sides to him. Always. One was, he was very classical, of course. Didn't compromise anything as far as classical music was concerned. But he was also a composer.
Yeah.
Where he was free and he tried to experiment with different instruments, different musicians all over the world. But of course he kept his raga format.
Yeah.
But the one thing which is very remarkable about him, being such a classical, traditional musician, he was very open to new innovations, newcomers, new compositions. He was so open. He went to every concert, listened to all kinds of music, accepted it with such open mind and heart, which was remarkable for a classical Indian musician, actually.
Yeah.
I wanted to tell us a little about his, how John Coltrane or how George Harrison came into his life, and how did that...
Well, he treated everybody the same, Well, from Menuhin, of course, the most senior, Yehudi Menuhin was dear soul, and somebody on par with Guruji. And of course, it was before my time, John Coltrane, but I heard stories of how he gave up everything, changed his way of presenting music after he heard Guruji and came to learn from him. Unfortunately, he passed away after a few lessons, but he changed his life. Philip Glass totally changed his way of presentation, the way he presented music after listening to Guruji. He was actually assisting him in a movie called Chappaqua in France, I think. Then came, of course, George Harrison. And I think I'll never forget the first lesson he had with Guruji. He was sitting and learning from Guruji. The phone rang, so he put the sitar down, crossed over the instrument to pick up the phone. Raviji took whatever came in his hand and just hit him on his leg and said, "Don't cross the instrument." Like that. So he was very strict, very proper. How with Jimi Hendrix, when he burnt his guitar, how he was so upset with him, and that's what he was.
Thank you. Guillermo, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I think, of course, how does it happen? What was in how do you become such a giant? And if you look at the different phases, in the 50s it's jazz. He starts performing in smaller tours, smaller venues, 1955, 1956. And, there are all these jazz musicians that are kind of freaking out, and folk was becoming a big thing. And then Bob Dylan, and, we were at the phase. I'm not a musicologist, but I've read enough to know that, looking at comparing also, I like to compare things with literature also. Music, literature, and, how looking at other forms. In literature also, you look at other forms, how they can influence you, whether it's surrealism, whether it's Sartre and existentialism. So in the mid-50s, it's the jazz scene, it's this how jazz musicians are attracted to him. In the 60s, of course, we have the pop scene.
Yeah.
But what happens when pop musicians listen, and then, of course, this whole psychedelia and looking at, the I don't want to call it the inner light, but the inner spirituality, which is kind of gets distorted, which is what Raviji didn't really want, because he saw that they were not getting it, they were not understanding it.
Yeah.
You know, when you grow up in the West, and because we're talking of Ravi in the context of the world, we're trained Western classical music. Of course, in some countries, if you live in Eastern Europe or in Spain, not always, because Spain, they suppressed the folk scene. It was all like, unless it was for nationalistic purposes. But in other countries, or if you're in Ireland, you can get access, or you also taught folk music at school. But not necessarily, always. You know, some jazz, but mainly folk or whatever is regional. You know, there are so many different, folk art forms, as you know. In Spain, we have not only flamenco, so many others. We have jota, we have so many. So it's kind of, when you're trained classical Western music, it's about structure, and I learned piano. So you kind of either start hating it or you become good at it, and it's rational. Yeah. It is rational. I mean, and I'm not saying the theory, because, theory, you have to listen to it. So you're taught something that is kind of, it's a structure, it's a language, and you have to write. It's like learning another language, and a lot of people hate it at school, really. Or you get into it. And then there's the more, in some, whether it's Irish music or flamenco, is where you have the fun, which is used in parties and fiestas. But then musicians, and I'm saying generally in the West, in the US, it was the folk became popular and so on. So what happens when you suddenly listen to Indian music for the first time? Or when a musician listens to Indian music for the first time? You can see, first you think, oh, it's anti-structure. I don't understand this. But it's something I can let myself go. Yeah. So that's what you feel. You feel you can let yourself go. It's like you travel. You can just, because you don't understand the structure of it. Of course, if you get into it later. So that connection with the spiritual, whether it's yoga, whether it's, and of course that whole other movement, yoga became big, spirituality, gurus became big. But perhaps the only figure in those years that was not a spiritual guru was Raviji. So that's what kicks in. So whether it's with pop musicians wanting to introduce a different element and using the sitar, but it also happened, not many people know, even in flamenco albums of the 70s, you have the sitar. And Camarón and Paco de Lucia were big fans of, and they knew it.
Back in the 60s,
yes, exactly. And then we went on in the 70s, and then Philip Glass, because you're looking for something else that's different. Yeah. And of course, you can move into jazz. And jazz musicians have an affection for, because especially with Carnatic music. And this is another aspect, very important. He was able to show the entire spectrum, folk, Carnatic, and Hindustani music to the audiences.
Absolutely. Way back in early 90s, I think 91, 92, he did this sitar to guitar with Menuhin, where he took all these Rajasthani musicians for the first time.
Yeah, the Mangnyas also actually spoke
First time ever, and I think Blanca Del Rey, the dancer, she joined us, Brussels, yes, that's right. I mean, for the first time, how Indian music traveled through the gypsies, country to country, and how it came to the West.
Was it called from the sitar to the guitar?
Sitar to guitar, that's right, A very interesting project. And yes, he took Carnatic. Carnatic music was very important to him. Yeah. How he incorporated so many ragas into the North Indian system. Yeah. So many Kirvani, Samendra Madhyamam, Charukesi. Of course, it was his own style, he did it, but he adapted so many beautiful ragas into the North Indian system. What else am I supposed to say?
Well, I think this is a good segue into talking about how I don't want to say the word legacy, but how he's still so much seen across the world, especially say you have a permanent display of his work and his instruments. We have a lovely display at IME. There's a permanent display in the British Museum. He has also been in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So tell us about that.
Too many.
Yeah, we'd like to know.
Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Metropolitan Museum, the Grammy Museum, the British Museum, the Liverpool Museum.
Yeah.
In Spain, Casa de la India. Yeah. And I think Paris also, they are very interested in doing one.
So where can we see his permanent works right now in the world?
It is. You know what? Another point I'd like to make is he was such a generous musician.
Yeah.
You know, he didn't just think about himself and his music. He was so generous. Not only did he take Indian music to the West, but also Indian musicians. So many Indian musicians who are famous today, who were not known then, like Hariprasad Chaurasia, Shivkumar Sharma.
And Shivkumar Sharma said it in his article.
Yeah, right. So many, you know, he wanted to share whatever he had with others. He wanted to show not just himself, but the vast talent of India to other countries, you know.
True. That was a great, I think, sharing of your thoughts. But tell us about where can we see his exhibits today?
You can see it at the Ravi Shankar Center in Delhi, which you have created. Casa de la India, IME, yes, Manasi.
The British Museum.
The British Museum. I think the Grammy travels sometimes. I'm not even very sure about it.
Right? I think they had a year-long.
Yeah, they travel with it. I think it went to Liverpool, London, and other places. And of course, British Museum has done a great job. And we're still working to do more at the moment.
So
I think we're doing a bust now for you, yes?
Yeah, Guillermo, tell us about that. Yeah.
I think rather than individual projects, which we can discuss before I do that, you mentioned his disciples of the music he presented, but I would even go beyond that. I think he not only presented them, but he taught them, or indirectly or directly, how to present themselves to the West.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key. I wouldn't be able to. We've featured and programmed Hariprasad Chaurasia. We've seen Shivkumar Sharma and Dr. L. Subramaniam, who's performing tomorrow, by the way. And
he,
yes.
yeah, he was in the tour too.
Yes, of course. Yeah. And incidentally with flamenco, happens to be my daughter. I have nothing to do with that.
No advertising now.
No advertising. So the way, just like he learned it from Uday Shankar, the way Indian musicians learned how to present and produce a show, and how to work with other musicians. This is something that is the legacy. It's indirectly, it's there, it's very much there. And another aspect I would like to highlight, I think what's very important and what struck me most and we have to mention the wonderful work that Oliver Krask in his book, Indian Sun. I really recommend that book. Unfortunately, he could not come. Indian Sun is his biography. The aspect of education, which is what we do at Kasan, and this can maybe connect with why are we interested in Ravi Shankar.
Yeah.
Okay, so education, and of course the center here, Indian Music Experiences, also has this other very important focus on education. The Kinnara Music School, he started in California. Kinnara, sorry. Then he did the other chapter first in Bombay. Then he was continuously...
Bombay and then Los Angeles.
Though he didn't have enough time, maybe, dedicating himself as a guru to others. Yeah. So he knew that it was important to teach. Yeah. And similarly, our institutions, you've asked me about, Casa de la India as a foundation was created, we're celebrating 20 years now. Yeah. It was created in 2003, so in March, you're most welcome. We want to organize a big concerts and program. It was created by the University of Valladolid, where I was, after finishing my PhD in Kerala, the City Council and the ICCR, Indian Council for Cultural Relations. And what do we do? What does it stand for? We want to showcase Indian art forms in Spain and create bridges. It's a two-way traffic. Yeah. It's not just of showing how things are. And immediately when we set about, because the best way to showcase is you need iconic figures. Of course, we do things whenever, there's Gandhi Jayanti, we explain Gandhi, we explain Tagore is very big in Spain because we have a beautiful translator, Juan Ramon Jiménez in Zenobia. and Ravi Shankar we use for musical education. So our entire Center for Performing Arts and Music we have at Casa de la India, and again, music and performing arts, very important.
Yeah.
Because that's the true spirit
absolutely.
of Raviji.
Yeah.
That's true.
He was a dancer until the age of 18. I mean, 18. And
Guillermo, actually, not many musicians can claim to have been on stage for all the 10 decades.
exactly.
Yeah.
So
From 10 years, 92
years.
All the 10 decades.
That's the beauty. But again, through him learning about dance as well. So in a nutshell, what we're trying to do at Casa de la India is go deep into educational programs. We use Ravi Shankar and his music and his legacy for high school programs, but also for kids, for children, for general public, and at university with university professors, musicologists and so on. So that's why we created this exhibition first in 2014. I think it was the first display after his passing on. We did just a year or 2 years afterwards an exhibition.
A year ago, yeah.
So that exhibition has been in different parts of Spain, and we thought, let's create a permanent display. So permanent music, and use it really as a tool. And every year, thousands of school kids come through. So I think this is what we
And his productions are still going on.
Yes.
All his concertos are being played.
And of course, we should mention Anushka, no?
The opera.
Anushka is there, and the legacy is continuing.
And the other students,
Of course.
Several,
I don't know if any one of you was there in London for the centenary concert, which had to be postponed by 3 years. But most of his disciples were there.
Yeah, talking of London, you were there, Guillermo. The concert was sold out, and we had an email from John McLaughlin saying, I'll do anything, I just need 2 seats. And there was no seats left. Then he said, okay, can I play? Because I was also a student, which I never knew.
No ticket.
So we couldn't accommodate him in the audience, so he came and played on stage one of Raviji's compositions, and it was amazing, absolutely. Fire Night he did,
So if and this is the beauty of why we connect with Rimpa and other institutions. It's not just about showcasing. It's about educating and using it for educational purposes. So I think I would be very happy if the Ravi Shankar Center. Now let's talk about the future.
Absolutely.
If the Ravi Shankar Center in Rimpa become a state-of-the-art research center. We need important research centers. Archival work is very important, which in India is very rare.
Yeah.
It's rare. If I would not want this to go, I mean, it could go somewhere else, some American university on, but why not here?
In our country,
If it's possible. I mean, you can have sections in other...
I thought you already were doing that, Guillermo.
We are in Spain, but I mean the Rimpa Center as a center...
No, actually what struck me when I actually got
Actually now, I'm taking leave. She's taking over Rimpa. There's Guillermo.
No, I remember when I first met Guillermo, I actually told him that you're doing so much more for our music and our culture than we perhaps are doing in our own country. So I actually completely agree with that, and that has to change.
Because as a school, yes, you've been doing very good work there, continuing educating and having maybe an annual festival and so on.
Yeah.
But the treasure house, I had the privilege of going through some of the material. Because
absolutely.
That's just part of it.
It's not only 20th century history of Indian music, it's the history of world music. So this has to be supported, maintained, and so on. We are doing our bit. There are many others doing it.
Absolutely.
And that's important. And another suggestion is, if we produce something or present it, of course there's the classical way, but Raviji also innovated. Let's not forget that. The innovation within that soul and within that mold, and it's now 2023. I'm not saying we have to use video, this, whatever. You can, but I think you have to be open to that innovation because we have to reach out to younger audiences.
Absolutely, which was, I think, what he really mastered. And why don't you share how he was so keen to work with young minds and his...
He was very particular that children are taught or introduced to music right from the very early days. And while he was a member of the Rajya Sabha, I think he put that across many times that music should be introduced in all schools at the very basic level, so children are introduced to music. And of course, he went around schools, colleges, teaching music, walked out of universities when they called his country's music ethnic. And that's how the term world music came into being, you know. And he was called the godfather of world music because he really walked out. He said, our music is much older than yours. Don't call it ethnic, you know. We don't call your music ethnic when you come to our country. So he was very particular about that. Walked out of big concerts when it was not treated properly, and that happened right from India. Actually, olden days, you know, musicians were not treated properly. They used to sit on the floor, people would walk around, things like that. He was the first one. Radha, you would know, right? He would first one to insist that there had to be a stage, proper stage. People need to be seated. And it was not accepted easily, but he fought for that, you know. And I remember my experience in London when the Queen was supposed to come for this concert. And he clearly told the ambassador then, Indian ambassador, that I have to have a stage and everybody will have to be seated before I come on stage, you know. And then I played Tanpura for him at that time, that concert. And he told me, no greeting anybody, just say namaste and sit down, you know. And he just, the Queen was there, the whole family, in fact, was there. And he just said, friends, I begin this concert with, as usual, no acknowledging anybody. That was it. You know, it's respect for his music.
Yeah, that's the term, respect. I think he was, because people were taking Indian music seriously. And when you talk about terms, which are very important, you know, this distinction of classical and the whole dialogue. But, you know, when we say, no, classical Indian music, there are, you know, Carnatic style, Hindustani, because we have this problem still now with very chauvinist, anywhere in the West, music directors who, when we propose, can you, you know, why don't we do the Sitar Quattrento now? We have this wonderful orchestra, and then the orchestral work. Let's not forget that. His orchestral work, presenting orchestra. So, but there are still a lot of musicians and directors, music directors say, but that's folk. Still now, I mean, we do only classical music. I said, what classical? This is classical. And why do you want to divide classical? You know, your so-called classical music is full of cannot be explained Western classical music without Bach. Anyone cannot be explained without the folk and the Deshi element, as if you want to do it. It's just what nurtures it. Any musician has been inspired by the tunes, you know, folk tunes, romantic music, all classic, all forms. So what is this categories? And I think he was able to break those barriers.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. This was really well done. I'm going to open the house for questions.
Thank you for this most illuminating discussion. I'm not really a scholar of music. I'm a long-time listener of music. And one of my most abiding memories was as a first-year college student, listening to Ali Akbar, Ravi Shankar and Ala Rakha play in modern school. This would be 1974, in memory of Alauddin Khan. And of course, I've heard them all ever since. But your comment about folk is very interesting because, and I want to elaborate on that. It's my theory. As I said, I'm not a scholar of music, but I'm a historian, so this comes more as a historian than as a student of music. If you look at the great Indian musicians, and again, I don't know much about Carnatic music, so I talk about Hindustani music. If you look at the great Indian musicians of the 20th century, which would be Ravi Shankar, Ali Akbar, Bismillah, Vilayat Khan, and Nikhil Banerjee instrumental, and Kumar Gandhar, Kesarbai Kerkar, Mallikarjun Mansoor, etc., Bhimsen, etc., in vocal. Now, it's my theory as a historian that they were born at a very important conjuncture. Why they were so great, but not just because of their music, because of the time they were born. So you had the radio and the railway. So the radio, so you could listen to Mallikarjun Mansu Dharwad, Rajguru Dharwad. I mean, the collections of All India Radio Dharwad will be just unbelievable if they're kept. But you also have the railway. So when Ravi Shankar began his performance career in India in the late 30s, early 40s. So he could go by the railway from, shall we say, Maihar to the Lucknow All India Music Conference. Someone would come from Kolkata, someone would come from Patiala, or from Lahore, because there was no partition. Now, why I'm saying this, before that there was no railway and there was no radio. So you had the gharanas in the princely darbars. So you had the people in Baroda or Jaipur anyway, singing for the Raja in his courtiers. But the person in Baroda didn't really know the court musician in Jaipur. He hadn't heard him in that sense. Right? Now, and they also had folk. So if you see, Ravi Shankar, both Ravi Shankar and Nikhil Banerjee, because, there's a lot of Bengali folk elements in their music. With Mallikarjun and Bhimsen, the Kannada folk elements, are vivid. Now, because the peasants were singing that. So you had both the folk coming from the bottom, and your technology allowed you to have because of the railway and the radio, you had exposure to other musicians in other parts of India, which was not possible in the 19th century. Two of the great ustads. Tansen, however great he may have been, did not know what a musician 100 miles away was singing. Right. Now, so that is the conjunction which produced them. Today, there is no folk. So, however gifted an Indian musician is, there will probably never be another Ravi Shankar, Vilayat Khan, Bismillah Khan, Ali Akbar. I'm sticking my neck out here. But however talented, so I think this is, as a historian, that's my explanation. But, of course, their innate genius and their teachers and their commitment and everything else is all part of it. But because, as I said, you were still in touch with the folk. But technology could allow you to move around and learn from other gharanas and other branches of music. So this is, as I said, this is a pure speculation. I'd like you, Ustads, to comment on it.
Ustad, I'm not the Ustad, sorry.
No, I think the beauty of that argument, which is, and I think Oliver Krask does a good job when he mentions Alauddin. The guru he had was one of, there must have been more, but he absorbed in his teachings already different styles, because the beauty is it's interconnections. And you're right, once transport is easier, and then of course technology, radio, and of course you had the music, his great masters, earlier. I would say it started earlier in Europe. Our Orientalism, in Diaghilev and our operas, listening to other forms and things traveling, aesthetics and so on. Interconnections, and now in the Indian context, is what nurture and what make great things. So when we say this somebody is rooted, what does it mean? Yeah, it's rooted, but this rootedness is about being open-minded and having cross-sections. And Ramanujan explains it, he says cross-fertilization of the Margam and the Deshi, and that's what creates something new, and that's where you can create. So I think we cannot do without the folk elements. You cannot understand you cannot understand Tagore without you cannot understand Garcia Lorca without Romancero.
Today there is no folk.
So I come to that.
Use your mind. It's not alive in the way it was.
Yes. But why, if you say that, I don't fully agree. What does it mean there's no folk? I think one of the things that's happened in Europe recently is that it's taking folk seriously. And I think it's not about there not being something. It's just you have to give it visibility. So a lot of the work that's been done by musicologists, mainly ethnic musicologists, and even jazz, a lot of work in Spain and Ireland and Germany is to work precisely with folk music. In India, I'm not so much aware of what's happening in the last few years. Everything is everything is pop and electronic and so on. Maybe you would be able to say, or maybe Manasi could tell us.
I also think folk is very much prevalent now. Actually, now I think I'm hearing more folk music than I ever did, because people are, that's where everything came from. And a lot of things. I've been introduced by, what's her name? Malini Avasthi,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
She's, so popular everywhere, and she's coming abroad and performing a lot of these beautiful folk songs.
But coming to the point, back to the point, why that generation was so great, I think today there's too much noise.
Yeah,
There is no
that's
time
true, yeah.
to absorb.
I was going to say there's too much technology now.
Traveling by train, that's a luxury
Yeah.
nowadays. I would love to go by train. They fly you into all the places. When I came to India, I came overland 3 times. And I think that's the reason why I'm still connected with India. Because I did the Trans-Siberian, went through Himalayas, Everest, came down. I was at the coronation of the Karmapa in Tsurpu, just a coincidence. Went down, spent time with the Lithuanian Everest expedition, went down to Kathmandu and went to overnight train. This is all the way from Spain, okay, hitchhiking and Siberia and so on. And I arrived in Benares. I don't know if I've ever told you this story. Took the night train from Gorakhpur. I had never seen the Indian sun, talking about sun. I had never seen the Indian sun. And it was 4:30 in the morning, arrived at the railway station, and this boy says, come, rickshaw. They put me in the rickshaw. I didn't know what Shivaratri, Navaratri, it was Navaratri. And I had no idea, what is Benares? First time in India. They put me on a boat, and I'm on the Ganga. And suddenly, I'm just blown away without drugs. You don't need drugs.
No, that's true.
And then the sun rises and the candles everywhere, and I say, wow,
Yeah.
So twice again I went overland. I said, I've never flown. I have lived 7 years in India, I'd never flown to India. Yeah. Because when you travel, and this is what another, when you travel, and we are connected. It's the same continent. It's just very long. Yeah. It's connected. So when you travel that way, you're able to absorb things much easier. If you do come, hop, and there's so much noise now, it's very difficult. But in any genre, it's going to be very difficult to have these great masters. I think it's going to be very difficult to have Picassos, Tagore's, and it's just too much,
True.
I'm not going to get into this debate about whether folk is alive or not. It is, but perhaps its format, like everything else, is changing with time, where its links with the original roots are perhaps getting more tenuous in this race towards making everything popular. As an example, we presented a group of Rajasthani Mangharam musicians a couple of months ago. And I said, we wanted them to stay back another day because we wanted to fix another engagement for them. And I expected them to be these very, people from the village, simple folk. Yeah. And he said, Madam Ji, I have to go back because my passport has too many stamps. I've traveled to 42 countries. I need to get a bigger book for my passport. So they're traveling all over the world. They're, being presented on large platforms. But of course, so yes and no would be my humble take on that debate.
That's true. Because they also have tech riders and all that now, which you would expect, but I got a tech rider from them as well.
That's right. Well, it's been so wonderful listening to Sukanya ji Bachinama speak and Guillermo as well. And certainly one of the most precious moments in my life was working under Chinnama's guidance to curate the Ravi Shankar at 100 exhibition at the Indian Music Experience, a part of which is now at the Ravi Shankar Center. And of course, we are very honored to have been chosen to house Guruji's Surbahar, Sitar and Tanpura, which are on permanent display at the museum. So thank you for making that happen. I needed to say that.
Very welcome. I want to say one point to everybody over here. If they haven't been to IME, you have to go there. I think it's a gem of our country. And I would really urge you to visit the IME, and Manasi and her team have done an outstanding job.
Thank you, Simran. And of course, thank you as well for your support in the exhibition and beyond. But I had 2 questions which I really wanted to ask, one to Guillermo and one to Chinnama. We've spoken so much, and I think, of course, you have done so much to take Guruji's legacy forward, but I think in my mind, the one great thing that you do, Chinnama, is make this godlike legend human, because you bring those personal stories and insights, so which only you can do. And I think that is, for me, why he lives on as this shining figure in all our minds because you are able to bring that personal insight. So I have two questions, as I said. One question is for Guillermo, which is, as much as a musician is a product of the times, a musician perhaps also can make a change in time, in history. And where India was before Ravi Shankar arrived, Guruji arrived on the global stage, and where India is. Certainly there's been a big change, and of course there are a million factors. But can, in your mind, musicians or a musician like Pandit Ravi Shankar make a perceptible shift in the barometer about how the world perceives a country or a culture? So that was my question to you, and I had a question to Chinnamma as well. Should I allow you to, should I ask you to answer and then?
Yeah, let him do that.
Yeah, well, I think it's a very simple answer. Of course, I mean, and other artists, great artists, have done it for certain cultures. He did that, precisely that. Ravi Shankar did that. Similarly, 3-4 names put together put flamenco on the world map. First, it was Paco de Lucia with Camarón, and then it was Carlos Saura making his films. Before Carlos Saura made films, because that's also very important, and Raviji did make these films, so documenting and making films about things, that's what prevails also, or publishing an album. And I think a lot of genres have the landmark moment where they create and transform, and there's a paradigm shift. Of course, a single person can do that in the arts, in literature.
Well, my question is actually beyond music. My question is
that's,
on the country and the culture itself.
That's precisely what I'm getting at. See, sorry I'm bringing in flamenco very often, but it comes to my mind because it is comparable to some extent, and flamenco is folk. Don't forget that. It's just very flexible, no? If you ask anyone in Spain, if I ask you right now, what is Spain? You would think probably bullfighting and flamenco music. Flamenco music, it's the arts. It's with Italians, it's maybe the food. With, what do you have? Yeah. And with India, if you ask India, people will think Gandhi, maybe Tagore. Music comes very high ranking. Maybe we should conduct a survey. And why music comes so high? Because of what he achieved. As a distinctive feature of a culture. As a distinctive feature of a culture. And I don't know to what extent, but I'm sure that India's public diplomacy is also to a certain extent relying on music as a way of conveying and disseminating the culture because of what Ravi Shankar did. He worked very closely with the private and the public sector, and we have to say that. One has to say that. And I work with the public sector because it's also about the cultural policies, and that's what you change, and that is what continues. So of course, it's iconic what Indian music is for a culture in at large. And India would not be very smart, or Indian diplomacy of any government would not be smart if they didn't use music. Of course, they now discovered yoga, but yoga was very much around. But the Indian music component is crucial, and it works. Same as with flamenco. Flamenco is this huge demand everywhere, and I hope it continues. It's not. You can't stop it. So yes, the answer is yes.
Yeah, thank you. And I would go so far as to say perhaps that every musician Indian musician who's performing anywhere in the world has, Ravi Shankar living in them, because he paved the way in many ways for what has come out.
And it doesn't mean that every Indian musician has to adore Ravi Shankar. They can be critical of him, no problem. And he kind of also enjoyed that. Why not? Of course. He wasn't a saint. He was a human being. He was a great genius. And all great geniuses have, and we've had a conversation about this.
Yeah, you remember he would
You can have your artistic enemies. You can have your you can agree to some extent. You can even be technically a better musician. It doesn't mean anything. You can be more virtuous. You can be faster, or you can be whatever. It doesn't. Sorry. Yeah.
He always, after a concert, he will never ask for praises. If you go, he will say, "Now tell me what was the bad point."
So Chinama, I wanted to ask you this, and I hope it's something that you'll share with us, because
If I can.
There is this clip that keeps going viral every few months, which is Guruji's last concert from that brilliant film by Alan Kozlowski, and there's this little bit that keeps going viral, and it is sort of brings together a lot of emotions, where it's Guruji finishing his concert and then he is bidding adieu. You were there in that moment. I think it was a moment of almost celebration, because it was this amazing life, but you were there, and do you think it's possible to describe that moment?
Okay, that particular concert, which was in Long Beach, 4th of November 2012, was scheduled about 6 months before. We had to cancel it because of his health. He went through a little operation, and that was in his mind, that he had cancelled that show, you see. When he was getting frail, we tried to say, it's not important. Why do you have to do that concert? He said, you will not understand. I'm committed to my audience. I have to do that show. Okay? So we got prepared for that show, the 4th of November, just 4 weeks before he left this world. Exactly the same, practiced morning, rehearsed with Anushka and the tabla players. We went to the show, he had oxygen. So both his doctors, a heart doctor and the lung doctor, were present at that concert. We had the oxygen connected. Everything was the same, like any other concert, Anushka performed the first half, and he was supposed to perform for 45 minutes. He came on stage and performed a good 2 hours, okay? And the only different thing I noticed is, usually in every concert, he would finish with that. But there he goes like that to everybody, if you see in the video. He's actually bidding goodbye to everybody, Then, I went on stage and I brought him. I pushed his wheelchair, came out, and his oxygen was just 78 level. Nobody could have performed that concert with that oxygen level, You need minimum 90 to be able to do it. The doctors couldn't believe it, how he did it. But the first thing he said when he came off the stage was, now I'm ready to go. That was the moment, And I think he knew it, that was going to be his last show.
Thank you.
How are we on time? Do we have time to take one more question? Okay, Radha, can we get this young lady to ask her question, please?
This question is for Sukanya, ma'am. Could you share a few things about Pandit Ravi Shankar as a father and a guru to Anushka Shankar, and whether there were any challenges there being a father and a guru, and whether during the growing years of Anushka as a musician, whether she had any pressure because her father was such a legend, and whether she needed certain specific guidance from her father about how to carve her own, which she has today. So if you can share a few things about that.
I didn't get the second part. What is it? As a father and a guru, yeah. Yeah. This was two sides, and they made it very clear in the house right from beginning. He was her guru, and he was a very strict guru as far as teaching was concerned. So they had this understanding that while she was in the music room, she followed the system, she sat quietly, she respected him, not argue, and do as she was told. But once she left the music room, she was allowed to put her feet on him, do whatever she likes, and have fun. So that was separate. And she was the only student for Guruji who started from the very beginning. You see, all other students were already trained and they were up to a standard before they came to learn from him. Anushka is the only one who was told how to hold the sitar. Anushka is left-handed, but she plays the right-handed sitar. And nobody will know. This is something unique because I actually felt very bad. One day I told him, it's not fair, that poor girl, she's left-handed and you've given her the right-handed sitar. And then he goes, it's okay, it's fine, I know what I'm doing. And I didn't argue, but now I think there's nobody with her left hand, because that's actually her right hand, you see. Because the way she moves on the frets is like unbelievable now, what she does. A sitar player can tell. Radha? You wanted to know anything else?
Just as a musician, when you have a father who's a legend, there could be pressures on her to...
She never took that seriously. She was always told, never to take it seriously. She can do whatever she likes, whatever she wants. If she wanted to do the sitar, it was fine. If not, that was fine too. She chose it, and she took it, in her own. And it was, of course, it was difficult. The pressure was huge on her to have such a legend. But I think she's come out of those shadows and she's made a place for herself. By God's grace and Guruji's grace.
One last question? Yeah. Yeah, please.
Chidamma, with due respect, in this whole conversation, we didn't talk of a very, very key period of his life. The legendary, brilliant Jugalbandis, which the word is so common today, with Khan Sahib, Ali Akbar Khan Sahib. I think they made poetry out of their duets.
I don't think there will ever be another Jugalbandi like them. Right?
That's
He started
exactly
it.
what I want to express.
Yes, he started it,
Yes.
and I don't think anyone can do that again because they had.
Today the concept of Jugalbandis is there, it's so common.
Yeah.
But what you hear is tamashas really, in that sense. Or it's a Carnatic Hindustani trying to play one after the other. That's no Jugalbandi. It's just a marketing.
It has to be natural, yeah. It has to be.
I would appeal to all people here to please take any of their Jugalbandi recordings and see how they complement each other, how they have created poetry. That's only because their source was the same. Their guru was the same. And they exactly knew where to give the cues, and the other would take over and move on from there.
It was seamless, yeah.
So, it's the concept of Bangladesh, for example, is such a popular thing
Good
on
points.
video.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's very easily accessible, so please go through that and you'll know exactly what I'm trying to say.
And that was one of the points I wanted her to say of how Concert for Bangladesh, he really started the trend of music being used to really, provide aid to the world, really. I mean, that was the first concert that happened that raised money for Bangladesh. So not only did he put India on the map, he also put Bangladesh on the map.
Right, absolutely.
So great. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. And you know, Guruji's legacy and his music will continue to enthrall us, I think, even children from any age. It's universal. And revered by all of us, and I think it'll continue to do that. And it's our job to take that legacy and keep it going. And thank you so much, Sukanya ji. Thank you so much, Guillermo, for coming here. Thank you, BIC, for hosting us, and thank you all for being such a great audience.